When I first imagined the Hope Center, it was never meant to be a monument. It was meant to be a refuge, an island of second chances built from the debris of broken relationships and forgotten promises. 5 years ago, it began as a punishment, not a dream. Yet as I stand at the threshold of the center today, hearing the laughter of women who were once invisible to the world, I realize that what began as my vengeance has become my salvation. Morning light seeps through the east windows, painting the corridors gold. The air carries the scent of brewed coffee and lavender, a combination that has come to define this place, half home, half sanctuary. I walk past framed photographs of the women who have lived, healed, and passed through these walls, nurses who carried wounded soldiers through fire, teachers who raised generations of dreamers, mothers who stitched the nation back together with calloused hands and unwavering hearts. 50 stories written, 50 lives redeemed. I pause outside the kitchen. There, amid the clatter of dishes and the hiss of butter on a hot pan, stands Charles, my son. 5 years ago, his hands were soft from handling contracts and golf clubs. Now, they are calloused and steady, holding a piping bag with the precision of a sculptor. The cake before him is a masterpiece of quiet devotion. 90 pink roses or 90 blue ones? He asks without looking up, though he knows my footsteps as well as my silence. Definitely pink, I answer. Blue reminds Carmen too much of hospitals. Pink it is, he murmurs, and continues decorating. Carmen, 90 years old today. Once, one of the first female accountants in her city, a woman who balanced the ledgers of entire companies at a time when she couldn't open her own bank account. I tell Charles this, and for the first time that morning, he looks at me. There's a depth in his eyes that wasn't there before, a humility forged by years of service. I think I was an idiot, he says softly, for believing age determined value. Carmen knows more about finance than I did after 40 years in business. It is more than an admission. It is an absolution, not just for the arrogance of youth, but for the blindness that had poisoned our family. When I ask about Leo and Penelope, he smiles, a rare, honest smile. Leo's helping Mercedes in therapy. Penelope's in the salon, doing what she does best, making people feel human again. The salon was Penelope's idea. In her second year here, she noticed how quickly the women began to fade after losing their rituals of beauty. She argued that dignity and self-care were not vanity, they were survival. And so she built this little haven, a place filled with the scent of jasmine lotion and laughter. When I step inside, I find her massaging Miriam's arthritic hands. Miriam, once a literature professor abandoned in a public hospital. Does that hurt? Penelope asks gently. Not at all, dear, Miriam smiles. Your hands are magic. I watch my daughter closely. Gone is the heavy makeup, the designer armor she once wore to hide her insecurities. Now her beauty is quieter, truer. The transformation in her eyes startles me. They no longer calculate. They care, Mrs. Whitlock, she greets me with a shy smile. Are you here to try the new arthritis treatment? I came to see you, I answer. She blushes, a small thing but meaningful. Once, she sought admiration through manipulation. Now she seeks it through purpose. When she finishes Miriam's treatment, we walk together into the garden. It is late morning, and the sunlight drapes the grounds in a warm haze. From our bench, we can see the entire center, the koi pond, the therapy area, the Tai Chi class swaying like a gentle tide. It is my favorite view in the world, the living embodiment of every dream I once wrote in secret after Richard's passing. How do you feel? I ask. Tired, she admits, her voice carrying both relief and fatigue. But it's a different kind of tired. Before, I was tired of pretending. Now I'm tired because I've worked all day helping people. It's a good kind of exhaustion. Do you regret anything? She watches the Tai Chi group for a long time before answering. I regret being so blind. I saw your fortune, not your fight. I tried to take what I should have tried to learn. I have waited years for those words, yet when they come, I find I no longer need them. Her growth has already said everything. And what have you learned? I ask. That respect isn't inherited, it's earned. That age brings wisdom, not weakness. That caring for others fills the emptiness nothing else could. And that you weren't just my rich mother-in-law. You were proof that a woman can build her own kingdom if she refuses to accept her limits. Her voice trembles on that last line, and the sunlight catches the tears on her cheek like glass. Before I can speak, Leo comes running across the courtyard, breathless. "Mom, Mercedes walked 10 steps on her own." His joy is radiant, boyish, unguarded. "She wants to walk to her rose garden next week," he adds proudly. "And what will you do to help her?" I ask. "I already spoke to the therapist. We're creating a new program. I'll be with her every session, if that's okay." That last part breaks something inside me. The son, who once never asked for anything but money, now asks permission to give his time. That sounds perfect, Leo. That afternoon, I meet with Mr. Cromwell in my office for our monthly review. The walls are lined with certificates and thank you letters, physical proof of intangible change. He adjusts his glasses, flipping through his notes. "How do you evaluate them?" "They've changed in ways I never thought possible," I say. "Not just as workers, but as people. Do you think it's genuine?" I smile. "You can fake manners. You can fake effort. But you can't fake compassion for 4.5 years." He nods, satisfied. "And the will?" "The will can wait 6 more months," I reply. "I want to see what they choose when the choice is finally theirs." He leans forward. "The final test?" "Yes, freedom. If they stay, I'll know I have my children back. If they leave, I'll know I did the right thing changing my will." That night, over dinner with Eliza, my lifelong friend, she asks, "Are you nervous about what they'll decide?" "Curious," I correct her. "At 76, I've learned that the best surprises come when you stop trying to control the ending." Outside, the night hums softly around the Hope Center, a chorus of crickets, distant laughter, and the whisper of lives reborn. Tomorrow will bring the reckoning, but tonight I let myself rest. The morning that marked 5 years since it all began arrived draped in the kind of stillness that precedes revelation. I woke before dawn, unable to sleep, my mind wandering through every corridor of memory, from the night I signed the first contracts for the Hope Center, to the moment my 3 children walked through its doors for the first time, bitter and furious, unaware that their punishment would one day become their purpose. The sun rose slowly over the east garden, filtering through the blinds of my office in thin, golden lines. On my desk lay 2 envelopes. One, the modified will sealed 5 years ago, a legal document outlining the terms of their redemption. The other, freshly signed last night, held the truth of what I now intended to do. I traced my fingers across the embossed seal, feeling the texture of finality. Today, they would learn that their freedom was real. No more obligations, no more conditions, just choice, the purest measure of who they had become. At precisely 10 o'clock, I heard the familiar rhythm of their footsteps in the hallway. Steady, confident, purposeful. Charles entered first, wearing his work apron still dusted with flour from the morning's baking. Leo followed, carrying a clipboard filled with therapy notes, his shoulders squared with quiet pride. Penelope was last, her hair pulled back, her eyes bright and unguarded, carrying the scent of jasmine from the salon. "Good morning," I said, gesturing for them to sit. "You know why you're here?" "Because today makes exactly 5 years," Charles replied. "And according to our agreement, we're free to go." I nodded. "Exactly. Your obligations are fulfilled. Your records are clean. You are no longer bound to this place. You are completely free." The room went silent, the kind of silence that has weight, where every heartbeat feels like a question. They looked at one another, and in that exchange I could see the conversation they'd already had, the long nights of doubt, the whispered debates, the quiet realizations. Finally, Penelope spoke. "We've made a decision," I braced myself. "I'm listening." Leo cleared his throat. "We want to stay." For a moment, the world stopped moving. The clock ticked, the sunlight shifted across the desk, but I couldn't breathe. "Why?" I managed. Charles leaned forward. "Because this place has become our home. These women are our family. And the work we do here, it's the first thing in our lives that truly matters." Penelope's eyes glistened. "We finally understand what you were trying to teach us. That life isn't about what you can take, but what you can give." I turned toward the window, needing the distance, the air, the sight of the gardens that had borne witness to all our battles and rebirths. Outside, Mercedes was walking, slowly but determined, across the lawn toward her rose garden, her cane tapping softly against the stone path. Leo had promised she'd do that one day, and he had been right. Beyond her, Carmen sat surrounded by younger volunteers, teaching them basic accounting, her wrinkled hands moving confidently over paper, her eyes alive with purpose. The world I had imagined years ago had finally taken root. "And what about your lives outside of here?" I asked quietly. "Your careers, your plans?" Leo smiled. "My career is here now. I've been studying geriatric physical therapy at night. I want to get certified and build new rehab programs." "I enrolled in psychology courses," Penelope added. "I want to specialize in emotional wellness for older women, help them rediscover joy, self-worth, identity. And I," Charles said, his tone steady, "have been working with Mr. Cromwell learning nonprofit management. I want to ensure this place never depends on luck or charity, only structure and sustainability." Their words struck me like a symphony, each note harmonizing with the next, each one a reflection of growth I had once thought impossible. They had arrived as opportunists, and now they were architects of compassion. "There's one more thing," Charles continued. "We've talked about it among ourselves. We want to make a formal proposal." My heartbeat quickened. "What kind of proposal?" "We want to renounce any inheritance," Penelope said softly. "All of your fortune should stay here, to fund this place forever." For the first time in years, I was truly speechless. "Are you sure?" "Completely," Leo said. "We've seen what money can do when it's used right. We don't want to inherit wealth. We want to protect its purpose. We want to be guardians of your legacy." The tears came before I could stop them, not from sadness, but from pride so immense it ached in my chest. "Do you know what that means?" I whispered. "It means we'll work here for modest salaries," Charles replied. "It means we'll never be rich. But we'll belong to something greater than money." "It means," Penelope added, her voice trembling, "that we'll finally be worthy of being your children." I couldn't hold back anymore. I reached for the envelope containing the modified will, the one that would have rewarded them $500,000 each, and tore it apart. The pieces fluttered to the floor like snow. "What are you doing?" Leo asked, stunned. "That will give you everything you thought you wanted," I said. "But you've already proven that you found everything I ever wanted for you." I reached into my drawer and pulled out the second envelope, the real one, signed just last night. "This," I said, placing it on the table, "is my true will." They exchanged glances, uncertain. "In it," I continued, "Charles is named Executive Director of the Hope Center, Leo, Director of Rehabilitation Programs, Penelope, Director of Emotional Wellness and Creative Initiatives. The rest of my estate, $4.8 million, is to create a network of centers across the country." Silence again, but this time it was sacred. "A network?" Charles whispered. "Yes, 10 centers in 15 years, each one a sanctuary where older women can live with dignity, independence, and purpose." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, as if compelled by the same heartbeat, they all stood and embraced me. Not as a formality, but as family, real, restored, and reborn. "After everything we did to you," Penelope wept, "why would you trust us with this?" "Because you are no longer the people who betrayed me," I said simply. "You are the people I always believed you could become. You just needed time." That afternoon, we gathered the residents in the main hall. The room was alive with curiosity. Rows of women who had once been strangers to each other, now a community bound by shared healing. I stepped to the podium. "I have the honor of announcing that the Hope Center will not only continue indefinitely, but will expand to help thousands more women." Applause erupted like thunder. And then Mercedes stood up, leaning on her cane. "Mrs. Whitlock," she said, her voice trembling but strong, "your children came here as punishment, but they are leaving as a blessing." The room fell into silence. She looked at Charles, at Leo, at Penelope. They cared for us when we were sick. They comforted us when we were lonely. They celebrated us when we felt forgotten. I don't know what kind of mother can raise children who change so much, but you are an example to us all. That night, we dined together in the communal hall, the four of us and Eliza, surrounded by laughter, music, and the scent of fresh bread. For the first time in 5 years, I looked at my children and saw not the fragments of a broken past, but the builders of a brighter future. And for the first time, I let myself believe, truly believe, that redemption was complete. After the applause faded and the hall slowly emptied, I remained seated, my hands resting on the polished wooden table, my gaze lost in the flickering reflections of candlelight. Around me, laughter still lingered, a quiet echo of joy that hadn't existed in this place when it first opened its doors. Back then, it had been built on pain, guilt, and duty. Now it pulsed with something far greater, purpose. As I looked at my children, chatting with residents who now regarded them with affection instead of suspicion, I realized how profound the transformation truly was. Charles was helping Carmen carry her knitting supplies, joking softly about the cake disaster he'd narrowly avoided earlier that morning. Leo was kneeling beside Mercedes, inspecting her posture as she proudly recounted her 10 steps, and Penelope sat with Miriam, their heads close together, whispering about a new wellness class she wanted to introduce. I had imagined forgiveness would arrive as a single moment, a clear, decisive instant when old wounds would close and peace would settle. But it hadn't been like that at all. Forgiveness, I learned, was not an act. It was a rhythm, a quiet repetition of understanding, day after day, until resentment simply ran out of breath. Later that night, when everyone had gone to bed, I walked through the empty hallways alone. The soft hum of the night lamps bathed the walls in gold. I paused before the portrait of Richard, my late husband, the one hanging beside the main entrance. His eyes, painted decades ago, still carried that same patient strength. "You'd be proud," I whispered to him. They finally found their way. The night breeze drifted through an open window, carrying the faint scent of jasmine from the garden below. It was then that I thought about his last letter, the one I'd read so many times that the creases were beginning to fade. The real legacy is not a monument, it's a map. At the time, I hadn't understood. I had built the Hope Center as my monument, a tangible symbol of survival and justice. But standing there, surrounded by living proof of transformation, I finally understood what he meant. A monument stands still. A map leads others forward. The next morning, I met with Mr. Cromwell to finalize the administrative changes. He was sitting in the conference room when I arrived, his usual composure replaced by a rare softness. "They've come a long way," he said as I entered. "They have," I agreed. "Further than I ever dared hope." He adjusted his glasses and looked at me over the rim. "And you? You've come further too, I think," I smiled faintly. "Perhaps, but it was never about me." "Maybe not," he replied, "but redemption is a two-way street. You gave them the structure, but you also gave them forgiveness. Without that, all the work in the world wouldn't have changed them." I looked out the window toward the garden, where a group of women were beginning their morning exercises. Among them was Penelope, guiding their movements with a calm grace I'd never seen in her before. "It's strange," I said softly. "For years I thought I was teaching them a lesson. Now I see that they were teaching me one too." Mr. Cromwell closed his notebook. "So, this new network, have you decided on a name for it?" "Yes," I said, smiling. "It will be called the Map of Hope. Each new center will carry the name of a woman who helped build this one. Carmen, Mercedes, Miriam, every story deserves a marker," he nodded approvingly. "That's a fitting tribute. And what about your role?" "I'll oversee the first expansion," I replied. "After that, it will be theirs to run. My part in this story is nearing its end." That afternoon, I gathered my children in the garden, the same garden where so many of our confrontations had once taken place. Now the air was calm, filled with bird song and the laughter of residents. "There's something we need to discuss," I said as we sat beneath the old oak tree. "The network will begin construction next spring. Each of you will oversee different regions. Charles, you'll manage operations and logistics. Leo, you'll coordinate therapy programs and staff training. Penelope, you'll design emotional wellness programs and creative outreach." Charles raised an eyebrow. "You're not going to be at the center of it?" I shook my head. "It's your turn now. I built the foundation. You'll build the future." Penelope reached for my hand. "We can't imagine doing this without you." "You won't have to," I said. "I'll still be here, just not as your supervisor. As your partner." It felt right, finally, to release control, to trust the hands that had once betrayed me. Because the truth was, they no longer belonged to the same people who had caused me pain. They belonged to people who had learned, through sweat and humility, what love really meant. That evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the garden in copper and rose, I took my usual walk among the flower beds. The roses were in full bloom, 90 of them planted the day Carmen turned 90, each one a symbol of the stories we had preserved. The center buzzed quietly behind me, alive with the sound of women talking, laughing, healing. Each sound was a thread, and together they formed the fabric of everything I had worked for. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. It was Leo. He slowed as he reached me, his face thoughtful. "Mom," he said, "Mercedes wants to plant a new rose bush. She says it's to honor her daughter, who passed away years ago." I told her it was a beautiful idea. "It is," I replied. "Every rose here tells a story. Let hers bloom too." He nodded, hesitated, then added, "I think you should name one after yourself." I laughed softly. "No, my story is already written here, in you three." He smiled, understanding, and we continued walking together in silence. Later, in the stillness of my room, I sat at my desk and opened a blank journal. Across the first page, I wrote a single line. Legacy is not what we leave behind, but what we awaken in others. As I closed the book, a deep calm settled over me. For years I had believed my greatest achievement would be proving my children wrong, but that was never the point. My greatest achievement was helping them discover who they were meant to be. Outside, the moon rose above the Hope Center, silver light spilling across the courtyard. I leaned against the window frame, watching it all. The quiet rooms, the warm glow of the salon, the faint laughter from the dining hall. It was more than a building now. It was alive, a living testament to the idea that even the most broken families could become whole again if given time, truth, and love. And in that moment, I understood what Richard's final words had truly meant. The map wasn't mine to draw anymore. It was theirs to follow and to expand, one life at a time. Morning sunlight spilled across the courtyard like liquid gold, brushing the faces of the residents gathered for their gardening class. From my office window, I watched them kneeling among the rows of soil, laughing as they compared blossoms and shared stories. Every corner of the Hope Center seemed alive, the air thrumming with conversation, the scent of earth and roses rising like prayer. It was easy to forget, on mornings like this, that this place had once been born from betrayal. Now it bloomed from renewal. I walked outside and was immediately greeted by Carmen, wearing her broad straw hat, her cheeks flushed with the pleasure of labor. "Morning, Mrs. Whitlock," she called, holding up a sprouting pot. "Look at this one, stubborn as me, refused to grow for weeks, and now it's the tallest in the row." I smiled. "Persistence runs in the soil, Carmen. Maybe it learned from you." She chuckled and bent back to work, humming an old Spanish tune. Watching her, I was struck by how deeply these women had woven their spirits into this land. This garden had once been a rehabilitation exercise. Now it was their symbol of survival. I found Penelope near the tool shed, her hands covered in soil, her hair pinned messily under a scarf. She was kneeling beside Miriam, who was showing her how to graft 2 different rose varieties together. "Isn't it wonderful?" Miriam said, her eyes glowing behind her thick glasses. "You join 2 branches, and if you treat them gently, they grow stronger than either would alone." Penelope smiled faintly. "Kind of like people." Miriam patted her arm. "Exactly, dear. The trick is patience. That line lingered in me long after I walked away. The trick is patience. It seemed to describe everything I had learned in my 76 years, and everything my children had learned in 5. By mid-afternoon, the sky shifted, turning pale with approaching rain. The residents moved indoors for their craft session, and I went to the therapy wing to check on Leo. I found him in the middle of a small crowd, demonstrating a new set of balance exercises. Mercedes, ever the stubborn one, refused the walker and insisted on doing it unaided. "One more step," Leo coaxed. "That's it. Beautiful, Mercedes." "You're walking like a queen," she laughed breathlessly, pausing for rest. "I'll hold you to that, young man." "Next week I'll dance." Leo grinned and offered her a bottle of water. "Then I'd better start practicing my steps too." As the others joined in the laughter, I noticed the way he watched them, not as patients, but as comrades. There was pride in his gaze, but more than that, tenderness. I thought of the cold, distant man he once was, obsessed with figures and profit margins. Now, he measured progress not in money, but in the number of steps an 85-year-old woman could take on her own. When the session ended, he caught sight of me. "Mom, I didn't see you there." "You were busy," I said, smiling. "And doing excellent work." He wiped his forehead, embarrassed. "It's strange. I used to think success meant outsmarting everyone else. Now I feel successful when Mercedes finishes an exercise without falling." "That's growth," I said. "The kind that lasts." He nodded, and for a moment, the boy I'd once known, the one hidden behind arrogance and ambition, flickered back through his eyes. But now there was something stronger behind it. Peace. Later that day, Charles gathered us all in the meeting room. He had been planning something for weeks, though he wouldn't tell me what. The residents and staff were seated when he stepped to the front, holding a small wooden box. "I wanted to make an announcement," he began. "We've been talking about expansion, about the new centers we'll build across the country. But before that, I think we should start with something smaller, something symbolic." He opened the box and pulled out a folded piece of parchment. "This," he said, "is the charter of the Hope Foundation. It's the legal body that will fund and oversee the network of centers. Mom, you're the founder, but we want you to know it's designed to run independently. Your legacy will live beyond all of us." Applause filled the room, but my voice caught in my throat. I could only nod, unable to find words that could measure the moment. Afterward, as the residents dispersed, I approached Charles. "You've outdone yourself," he shrugged. "I just wanted to make sure this doesn't end with us. It needs to keep growing." I rested my hand on his arm. "It will. Because you've rooted it in something real." That night, the rain finally came, soft, steady, cleansing. From my window, I watched droplets slide down the glass, the reflection of the courtyard shimmering like a watercolor painting. I thought about how everything had begun with punishment and ended with purpose. How easily the lines between those two things could blur when the heart is willing. Penelope knocked softly on my door before entering. "Can I sit with you a while?" "Of course," I said. She curled up on the sofa beside me, pulling a blanket around her shoulders. "I keep thinking about how much I wasted," she murmured. "All those years chasing things that never mattered." "Regret is only heavy if you carry it alone," I told her. "Use it as fuel instead. It burns bright if you let it." She smiled faintly. "Do you think people can really change, or do we just learn to hide our worst parts better?" I looked at her, at the woman she'd become, softer, wiser, her ambition tempered by empathy. I think people change when they finally see the cost of staying the same. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the rhythm of the rain. It sounded almost like applause, gentle and unending. "Do you think Dad would have been proud of us?" she asked quietly. I swallowed hard. "He would have been proud of you all, not because you changed, but because you found the courage to do so." She leaned her head on my shoulder. For a long while, neither of us spoke. When she finally left, I turned off the lights and stood before the window again. The garden was shimmering under the lamplight, each rose heavy with rain. It struck me then that growth doesn't end with blooming. Even flowers must weather storms to strengthen their roots. As I watched the water drip from the petals, I realized that this was the true essence of legacy, not something carved in stone, but something alive, fragile, and constantly renewed. Tomorrow, I decided, we would begin preparations for the new centers. Tomorrow, the map would begin to unfold. And as the rain whispered against the glass, I smiled to myself, certain of one thing, that the bloom of tomorrow would be brighter than anything I had ever dared to imagine. The next season arrived quietly, with the scent of rain-soaked earth and the hum of construction in the distance. The old gates of the Hope Center opened wider than ever before, welcoming new faces, volunteers, architects, and community leaders who had heard of what we had built and wanted to learn how to grow their own gardens of change. For the first time since its founding, the Hope Center felt like the heartbeat of something larger. It was no longer just a place. It was becoming a movement. I spent my mornings walking among the blueprints spread across the conference table, the air thick with the scent of coffee and fresh ink. Leo would be explaining therapy models to a cluster of visiting social workers, Penelope, standing beside a projector, describing the structure of our wellness programs, Charles, meticulously reviewing budgets and permits. Watching them, I often found myself overwhelmed by a strange, tender disbelief that these were the same people who had once resented my vision. Now they spoke of it as though it had always been theirs. One afternoon, while the staff buzzed around the main hall, I stepped outside for air. The garden shimmered with late spring light. Carmen sat beneath the oak tree, embroidering one of her intricate cushion covers. She looked up and smiled. "Busy day, eh, senora?" "Every day feels like 3 lately," I said, laughing. "Then you must remember to rest," she warned, wagging a playful finger. "Even roses need a pause between blooms." Her words made me pause. There was a depth to Carmen's wisdom that no degree or training could replicate. She had lived every truth I was still learning to put into words. That evening, during dinner, I gathered my children around the long table in the dining hall. The room was filled with chatter, the kind of music only joy could make. "Tomorrow we begin construction on the first branch," I told them. "In the Southern Valley." Penelope's eyes sparkled. "That's near the river where the floods hit last year, isn't it?" "Yes," I replied. "The community there lost more than homes, they lost hope." "We'll give them both back," Leo raised his glass. "To new beginnings, then." "To legacy," Charles added. But as we clinked glasses, I couldn't help noticing how tired Charles looked. The corners of his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Later, after the others had gone to bed, I found him still at the table, studying a ledger under the dim light. "You haven't stopped working since morning," I said softly. He rubbed his temples. "There's always something left undone." "Even the strongest pillars need rest," I reminded him. He sighed. "You make it sound easy." "It isn't," I said, taking the seat beside him. "But you'll burn the foundation if you keep feeding it fire instead of light." He stared at me for a moment, then laughed quietly. "You've been reading too many poetry books, Mom." "Perhaps," I said, smiling. "But poetry and building aren't so different. Both require balance, structure, and heart." He nodded, and for a while we sat in silence, listening to the clock tick. I thought about how far he'd come, from a man who measured success in profits to one who now lost sleep over how to fund more hope. The following week, we traveled to the Southern Valley. The land stretched wide and wounded, marked by the remnants of the flood. As I stepped from the van, the soft squelch of wet soil met my boots, and I could almost feel the sorrow that lingered in the air. Yet beneath it all, there was life. Stubborn grass pushing through the mud, children playing near broken fences. Penelope moved to my side, her eyes scanning the landscape. "It's perfect," she whispered. I nodded. "Yes, broken, but perfect." The villagers gathered to greet us, tired faces, cautious smiles. I introduced myself, explaining why we had come. "We are not here to rebuild walls," I told them. "We are here to plant roots." For a moment, no one spoke. Then a woman stepped forward, her hands calloused, her dress worn. "You want to build a center here?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "A place for healing, for women and families who have lost their homes or their sense of belonging." The woman's eyes softened. "We've lost both," she murmured. "But maybe we can find them again." By the end of that day, the villagers had joined us, clearing debris, marking boundaries, and preparing the ground. Leo worked with the local carpenter to design the therapy rooms. Charles supervised logistics. Penelope began sketching garden layouts. As the sun dipped low, painting the valley in amber and rose, I stood watching them all, a strange peace filling my chest. It wasn't about me anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. It was about them, about everyone willing to believe that new life could grow from loss. That night, we stayed in a small inn nearby. I couldn't sleep. The sound of rain on the roof brought memories of earlier storms, those that had once threatened to tear my family apart. But this rain sounded different, softer, cleansing. In the early dawn, I walked outside and found Penelope already awake, sipping coffee beneath the awning. "You couldn't sleep either?" she asked. I shook my head. "I was thinking of your father," she smiled gently. "I dreamt of him last night. He was standing in a field, holding blueprints." I looked at her sharply. "Blueprints?" "Yes," she said. "But not for buildings, for people." He said, "Build hearts first. Walls will follow." I smiled through sudden tears. That sounds exactly like something he'd say. For a long while, we sat in quiet companionship, watching the valley slowly wake beneath the pale light. Farmers emerged from their homes. Roosters called across the fields. And in the distance, I could already hear the rhythmic clang of hammers, the heartbeat of the future taking form. Over the next weeks, the new Hope Center began to rise, brick by brick. Children painted murals along the outer wall, and women planted the first seedlings in the courtyard garden. It was smaller than the original center, humbler, but perhaps more beautiful for it. When the opening ceremony finally came, I stood before the gathered crowd and said, "Hope does not arrive whole. It grows like these gardens, watered by patience, rooted in pain, but destined for light." As the people applauded, I saw in their faces what I had once seen in my own reflection, fear turning to belief. And that day, I realized something that would stay with me forever. We were not just building centers. We were building belonging. The wind rose gently, carrying the scent of fresh soil and lilac. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me, the breeze whispering like a promise. The season of building had begun, and with it, the world felt wide open again. I can still recall the first night the valley came alive again. Lanterns swung from wooden beams, laughter echoed through the hills, and the air smelled of earth and promise. The new Hope Center stood there, not just a building, but a declaration. It rose like a memory reborn, humble yet proud, built by hands that had known both suffering and grace. We had promised ourselves we would not replicate the original center brick for brick. Each new branch would breathe its own story, shaped by the people who called that land home. This valley's story, I quickly learned, was one of endurance. On opening morning, a young woman named Adela approached me. She was thin, no older than 30, her eyes holding both exhaustion and fire. "I was a teacher," she told me, twisting her scarf nervously. "Before the floods, I taught children in a small school that no longer stands." "You'll teach again," I said gently. She shook her head. "There's no school, no books." "Then we'll build one," I replied simply. Adela's face trembled with disbelief, then hope. "You mean it?" "I never say anything I don't intend to do," I said. That moment became the first seed of the valley's rebirth. Within weeks, Adela organized evening classes under the veranda of the new center. She taught the women to read again, their voices stumbling at first, then growing strong. Leo built adaptive benches for the elderly who joined, while Penelope brought in boxes of donated notebooks and pens. Charles watched the sessions from a distance, often leaning against a column with folded arms, his expression unreadable. One evening I found him there again, long after the last of the students had gone. The lamps had been turned off, leaving only moonlight on the stone floor. "You've been quiet," I said, stepping beside him. He exhaled slowly. "It's strange. I used to spend my days chasing numbers. Now I find myself thinking about stories." "Stories?" He nodded. "The kind that don't fit on spreadsheets like Adela's or Carmen's. They make the numbers meaningless." "That's because people are not numbers," I said softly. He smiled faintly. "I used to think that was naive. Now I think it's the only truth worth believing." That conversation stayed with me long after. It reminded me how transformation isn't a single moment. It's 1,000 small recognitions that accumulate until the soul no longer fits its old skin. The next months brought new challenges. Rain returned, fierce and unrelenting, testing the foundations we had built. One stormy night, as thunder rolled across the valley, water began to pour through the unfinished wing of the center. Without hesitation, Charles and Leo ran out into the storm, their silhouettes flickering in flashes of lightning as they dragged sandbags into place. I followed them with blankets, shouting above the roar. "You'll get sick!" Charles looked back, rain streaming down his face. Then we'll recover, like this place did. The storm raged until dawn. By morning, the damage was heavy, but the structure stood firm. The villagers gathered, expecting despair. But instead, we began to laugh. It wasn't madness. It was defiance. We had built something that could survive the storm, and in that survival, we found strength. Later, as the sun broke through the clouds, Penelope stood beside me, watching the rainbow form above the hills. "You think we'll ever be done?" she asked. "Done?" I echoed. "Hope doesn't end. It just changes address," she smiled. "Then maybe that's what we'll do. Keep forwarding it." Her words made me laugh softly, but they also stayed with me. In the weeks that followed, the new center grew not just in walls, but in purpose. A sewing workshop emerged from a converted storage room. A local baker began teaching young women how to make bread for sale. Leo trained volunteers in physical rehabilitation using improvised tools. What had begun as a refuge was transforming into a living, breathing ecosystem. One evening, we hosted the Valley's first Night of Stories. The entire community gathered in the courtyard, lanterns flickering like stars. Adela read from a notebook, a story she had written about the flood, not as tragedy, but as rebirth. When she finished, silence fell over the crowd, followed by slow, growing applause. That applause echoed deeper than any speech could. It was the sound of people reclaiming their own voices. Afterward, I walked alone to the riverbank. The moonlight spilled across the water like melted silver. I sat on a smooth rock, feeling the quiet pulse of life all around me. For years, I had dreamed of creating something that would outlive me, something that would carry love into places that had forgotten its name. Now, sitting there, I realized it was happening. But as joy settled in, so did fear, the quiet kind that comes when you know how much you have to lose. What if it all unraveled again? What if my children's faith wavered? What if time itself, that relentless tide, swept this away? Then I remembered Richard's words. The real legacy is not a monument. It's a map. I looked at the river and smiled. Maps change with floods and landslides, but rivers always find their way back to the sea. The following morning, Charles joined me by the water. He was holding a folder damp with dew. "We've been talking," he said. "Leo, Penelope, and I. We want to take the model to the mountains next. There's an old mining town there that's been forgotten." I studied him carefully. "You're sure?" he nodded. "We don't just want to follow your path, Mom. We want to extend it." Something inside me shifted then, a quiet letting go. They didn't need my permission anymore. They needed my blessing. "Then go," I said. "Go and build where light refuses to stay." He smiled, his eyes bright with the same determination I once had in my youth. "We'll make you proud." "You already have," I whispered. That evening, as the valley's lights shimmered against the dark, I stood at the window of my small room in the center. The world outside hummed with life, laughter, footsteps, the faint notes of a song. And for the first time in decades, I felt something close to completion. But deep in my heart, I knew this was only the midpoint of the journey, the echo before the crescendo. Because every act of hope calls another to answer, and somewhere out there, the next song of redemption was already beginning to play. The valley had found its voice, and so had we. The morning we left the valley, the sky was brushed with pale gold. Dew clung to the grass like diamonds, and the distant hills glowed beneath the rising sun. As our van rolled over the winding dirt road, I turned for one last look at the Hope Center nestled in the green. Alive, humming, complete. Adela waved from the gate, her hair tied back, her students gathered around her. They looked like the next generation of caretakers, and for a moment, I felt the rare comfort of knowing something I had built would thrive without me. The road to the mountains was long and uneven. The engine hummed as Charles drove, Leo beside him scanning maps, and Penelope humming softly in the back seat while sketching on her notepad. The air grew cooler as we climbed higher, the trees taller, their shadows stretching across the path like long memories. We reached the mining town by dusk. It sat carved into the slope of a mountain that seemed too tired to hold it anymore, Most houses were abandoned, wood warped, roofs caved in. The only signs of life were smoke from 2 chimneys and a stray dog watching us with cautious eyes. "This place looks forgotten," Penelope murmured. "It's been waiting," I corrected. Charles parked the van beside an old chapel. The bell tower leaned slightly, its iron cross rusted but still standing. "We'll make this our base," he said, "at least until we understand what the town needs." We set up camp inside the chapel's hall, where dust floated like ghostly fireflies in the light of our lanterns. Leo found a cracked wooden plaque that read, "San Telmo Mine Workers Union, 1924. It was a relic of the town's once proud history. That night, around the small fire we built, a group of villagers approached. They were wary at first, faces half hidden beneath scarves and shadows. An elderly man stepped forward, leaning on a cane fashioned from a shovel handle. "You're not from here," he said. "No," I answered, standing. "We came to help." He studied me in silence. "Help costs money. We don't have any." "We don't want your money," I said. "We want your stories." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Finally, a woman spoke. "Stories don't feed the hungry." "No," I said. "But they remind the hungry why they must eat." The old man squinted at me for a long moment, then gave a small nod. "Tomorrow you'll see what's left of this town," he said, and walked away. We spent the next day exploring. The mine had been closed for over 20 years after a collapse trapped 12 workers inside. The tragedy had emptied the town, leaving behind grief that clung to the mountain air. Penelope walked through the ruins silently, tracing her fingers along the blackened stones. "It feels heavy," she whispered. "Pain leaves residue," I said. "But that means there's something to cleanse." By noon, we had found what would become the foundation of the next Hope Center, a sturdy old warehouse at the edge of the town. Its roof was mostly intact, its bones strong. "We can work with this," Charles said, running his hands over the beams. The villagers watched skeptically as we began cleaning. A few children peeked in through broken windows, curious. Leo called out, "Want to help?" They hesitated. Then one brave boy stepped inside, clutching a broom taller than himself. Soon 2 more followed. By sunset, the room buzzed with laughter and dust, the beginnings of something stirring in the air. That night, over dinner of lentil stew shared with the villagers, the old man returned. He introduced himself as Matteo. "You really mean to stay?" he asked. "As long as it takes," Charles said. Matteo's gaze moved from him to me. "We buried 12 good men here. We stopped believing anything good could grow again." "Then let us plant the first seed," I replied. He said nothing more. But the next morning he was the first to arrive, carrying a bucket of nails and an old hammer. From that day forward, the transformation began. Slow, stubborn, miraculous. The people of San Telmo worked side by side with us. The women repainted the walls, the men reinforced the structure, and the children filled the space with chalk drawings and laughter. The echoes of the mine's sorrow began to fade, replaced by music, conversation, and the smell of bread from the new kitchen Penelope organized. Leo set up a small rehabilitation area for the elderly miners whose bodies had suffered from years underground. He taught them gentle exercises, and I often found him sitting afterward, listening to their tales. "They talk about the mountain as if it's alive," he told me once. "Maybe it is," I said. "Maybe it's been waiting to be forgiven." One evening, after weeks of work, we held a gathering under the old bell tower. Matteo spoke first. His voice trembled but carried weight. "We spent decades asking what the mountain took from us," he said. "We never asked what we left behind in it. Tonight, I think we found our answer." Then he pointed to the warehouse, now glowing with light and music, and whispered, "We left our courage." I felt tears sting my eyes. For all the speeches and awards I'd given in my life, none had moved me like that. Later that night, I walked outside, the cold air biting but refreshing. The moon hung over the mountain like a quiet guardian. I thought about the years I'd spent chasing redemption, for myself, for my children, and realized redemption wasn't something to chase. It was something to build, brick by brick, hand by hand. Charles joined me, his coat pulled tight. "They're planning to name the center after you," he said with a small smile. I shook my head. No, name it after the miners, he frowned. Why? Because hope belongs to those who lost it first. He nodded slowly, and together we watched the bell tower swaying gently in the wind, its rusted cross glinting faintly in the moonlight. The mountain had given back what it had taken. Not the same lives, but new ones, reborn through compassion. And though I didn't know it then, that mountain would become the heart of everything we built next, the proof that even the deepest wounds can become sacred ground if tended with love. The road had brought us higher than we had ever been before, both in body and in spirit, and I could feel, deep in my bones, that the air up here wasn't just thin, it was holy. The first snow of winter fell quietly over San Telmo, covering the mountain town in a thin, glistening veil. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke, and when the dawn light hit the snow, it scattered into 1,000 shards of gold. From the window of my small room above the New Hope Center, I watched as the villagers began their morning routines, shoveling paths, lighting fires, and waving at one another as though the mountain itself had awakened with them. The transformation was almost unrecognizable. The once abandoned mining warehouse now pulsed with life. Inside, laughter echoed from the therapy rooms, the scent of freshly baked bread drifted from the kitchen, and children practiced reading by the glow of lanterns. It was no longer a building, it was a pulse. A promise kept. Charles had taken on the role of local director with an energy I hadn't seen since his youth. He managed volunteers, wrote reports, and still found time to bake bread every morning with the women in the kitchen. Penelope, ever the heart of emotional healing, had turned one of the old mine offices into a reflection room. Walls painted a calm lavender, shelves lined with poetry books, and a sign above the door that read "Rest" is also a form of strength. Leo, meanwhile, had built something extraordinary. At the base of the slope, he cleared a space where the old mining rails once ran and turned it into a garden path for physical rehabilitation. The rails remained, polished, gleaming, now symbols of endurance rather than exhaustion. Each morning, he guided elderly miners along the trail, cheering as they took careful steps. Watching them all work was like witnessing the soul of my family reborn. One afternoon, as I walked down the garden path, I found Leo sitting beside Mateo, the old miner who had first doubted us. The two were quietly watching the snowfall, their hands clasped around steaming mugs. "How's your leg today?" I asked Mateo. He chuckled softly. "It argues with me less than yesterday. Maybe it's starting to forgive me." "Forgive you?" I asked. He nodded toward the mountain. "We took from her without listening. Maybe that's why she buried our brothers, but she's giving back now. Through you." I smiled, though his words carried a sadness I couldn't ignore. "We're not here to take," I said. "We're here to heal." He studied me, his weathered eyes gleaming. "And that's why she listens to you." The simplicity of that statement struck me like a quiet prayer. For years I had battled with the question of purpose, of what redemption truly meant. Now, sitting beside a man who had spent half his life underground, I finally understood. Redemption wasn't about being forgiven by others. It was about learning to forgive yourself enough to start again. That evening, a storm rolled in. The snow thickened, the wind howled through the valleys, and the air grew sharp. The center's power flickered once, twice, then went out completely. For a moment, everything was silent, except for the wind whispering around the corners of the building. I could hear nervous voices rising in the dark. Penelope moved swiftly, lighting candles and distributing blankets. Charles organized the staff, ensuring every resident was safe. Leo went out into the cold to check the generator, despite my protests. Minutes turned into hours. The storm refused to rest. The walls creaked beneath its weight, and for a brief, frightening moment, I thought the roof might collapse. But the building, our building, held strong. When Leo returned, snow crusted on his jacket, he was grinning. "Generators fixed," he shouted over the wind. "We've got power again." Cheers erupted across the rooms, and the lights flickered back to life, soft and golden. I felt something inside me swell, pride, relief, and awe all at once. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I stood by the window, watching snowflakes swirl under the moonlight. The storm had passed, leaving the world breathless and still. I thought of all the storms we'd faced before, the kind that broke families, not roofs. And yet somehow we had survived them all. The next morning dawned clear and bright. The villagers gathered outside for what Charles called a gratitude meeting. He stood on the steps of the center, his breath misting in the cold air. "We survived the storm," he began, "because we faced it together. This place stands not because of walls or bricks, but because of the hearts that refused to crumble." Penelope followed, her voice trembling with emotion. "When we first came here, we thought we were here to save others. But it turns out we were the ones being saved." Then Leo spoke, holding up a wooden plaque. "We want to dedicate this garden path to the memory of those lost in the mines. May every step taken here remind us that life always finds a way to rise again." The crowd applauded, some weeping openly. I could feel my heart swelling so much it almost hurt. When they turned toward me, urging me to say something, I hesitated. I had said so many words over the years, speeches, lessons, warnings. But now only a few felt necessary. "Grace," I said finally. "That's what this is. Grace isn't a gift we receive when we're good enough. It's what lifts us when we've fallen too far to rise alone. This mountain has given us grace, and we must carry it forward." Silence fell. Then applause broke, long and thunderous. That night, we held a celebration inside the hall. The villagers sang old mining songs, their voices rich and raw. Charles played guitar, Penelope danced with the children, and Leo lifted Matteo into a slow waltz that made everyone cheer. I sat by the fire, watching them all, my heart full. It struck me that I was no longer leading. Not really. My children had taken the reins, not as heirs, but as builders of their own faith. I was merely the keeper of the light they now carried. Later, as the crowd thinned and the embers dimmed, I stepped outside. The stars shone brighter than I'd ever seen them. The mountain stood tall and silent, as though listening. I whispered into the cold air, "Thank you." A breeze stirred, gentle but sure, and for an instant, I could have sworn I heard Richard's voice, soft, steady, loving. "You've climbed far enough, my love. Let them lead the rest of the way." Tears blurred my vision, but I smiled. The summit of grace was not a peak to conquer. It was a place to rest, to look down and see how far love had carried us, and in that moment, I knew I had reached it. Spring came late to the mountain. It began as a whisper, the faintest loosening of snow, the sound of dripping water echoing down the narrow alleys. Then, one morning, I awoke to birdsong, fragile at first, but growing stronger each day until it filled the valley like a hymn. The white peaks softened into green, and the wind carried the scent of new life. It had been almost a year since we first arrived in San Telmo. What once was a forgotten mining town had become a sanctuary, not just for those who lived there, but for travelers who found their way up the mountain searching for healing. We welcomed them with bread, blankets, and the same question I always asked: "What do you hope to rebuild?" Some came with injuries, some with grief, and some simply seeking a place where silence didn't hurt. Every story that passed through our doors felt like another stone laid in the foundation of something sacred. Charles had grown deeply rooted here. He started organizing a small community school for the children, teaching them languages, music, and carpentry. Penelope had become their mentor in ways that went beyond lessons. She taught them how to speak their fears aloud. And Leo, ever restless, had started planning outreach trips to nearby towns, taking our message of renewal farther each time. It was beautiful, what we had built. But I knew the time was coming when I would have to leave it behind. I felt it first in the quiet moments, the heaviness in my chest, the fatigue that lingered longer than it used to. The mountain air that once felt crisp now felt thin. I didn't tell anyone at first, not because I feared death, but because I wanted to savor life while it was still so full around me. One evening, while the sun sank behind the peaks, I found Charles fixing the fence near the garden. His hands were rough with calluses, his face marked with small lines that spoke of both exhaustion and peace. "You've made this place your own," I said softly. He wiped his brow and smiled. "You showed us how." I hesitated before speaking again. "You'll keep it going, won't you? Even when I'm gone?" He paused, setting down his tools. Don't talk like that. I'm not afraid, I said. I just want to be sure it lives on. He looked at me then, and in his eyes I saw the boy he used to be, the one who built towers of sticks by the river, dreaming of changing the world. It will live, he said firmly, because you've made it part of us. That night, I sat by the window writing in my journal. I wrote not about the centers or the work, but about the people. Mateo's weathered hands, the children's laughter, Penelope's paintings on the chapel wall. I wanted every memory to stay alive somewhere beyond me. A few days later, I collapsed while walking the path by the river. The next thing I remember was waking in bed, Penelope's worried face hovering above me. "You scared us," she whispered, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "I'm fine," I murmured, though I wasn't. My body was simply growing tired, the way old roots surrender after holding too long. For weeks, I rested while the others continued their work. I watched from my window as Leo led a group of children planting wildflowers on the hillside. When the wind blew, the petals danced like tiny flames. Life was continuing, as it always does. One morning, Penelope brought me breakfast, a bowl of porridge and honey. She sat beside me, her eyes glistening. "I don't want you to go," she said. I took her hand. "You'll find me in every light that touches this place. You'll hear me in the wind through the pines. Leaving isn't the end, sweetheart. It's just another path." We cried together, quietly, as the morning sun streamed through the window. When word spread that my health was failing, the villagers began to visit. Mateo came first, carrying a bouquet of mountain herbs. "You gave us our lives back," he said simply. "Now let the mountain give you peace." The children brought drawings, crude, colorful sketches of the center, of me, of all of us standing under the bell tower. They taped them to the walls so that every time I opened my eyes, I saw laughter staring back at me. One evening, when the light turned golden, Leo came into my room. His eyes were red from crying, though he tried to hide it. "You always told us to keep moving forward," he said. "But how do we if you're not walking beside us?" "You'll still feel me there," I said. "Every time you choose kindness over pride, every time you listen instead of speak, that's where I'll be." He bowed his head. "You were the light, Mother," I smiled weakly. "No, Leo, you were all the light I ever needed. That night, sleep came easily, like an old friend's embrace. In my dreams, I saw the mountain glowing under a vast sky. I walked along the path we had built, but this time there was no pain, no weight, only warmth. When I awoke, the dawn was just beginning to rise. The world outside was painted in silver and pink. I could hear laughter downstairs, Charles shouting instructions, Penelope humming, Leo's deep voice echoing through the hall. Life was moving, strong and certain. I closed my eyes again and whispered, "Thank you," and then the mountain breathed with me, slow, soft, eternal. By the next morning, I was gone. They found me peacefully in bed, my journal still open beside me. On the last page, I had written only 4 words. We built the light. They buried me under the old pine tree that overlooked the valley. Charles carved my name into a wooden marker, Penelope painted it with golden stars, and Leo planted wildflowers all around. The villagers came, hundreds of them, carrying candles. As the sun set, their lights flickered together, a sea of tiny flames, dancing in the wind. From where they stood, it must have looked like the mountain itself was glowing. And perhaps, in some small way, it was, because love, once given freely, never truly leaves the earth. It simply changes form, from words to deeds to the very air that carries us home. The morning after my burial, the mountain awoke differently. Mist rolled through the valley like a living memory, soft and deliberate, wrapping the Hope Center in silver threads. To the villagers, it felt as though the world itself had paused to exhale, not in grief, but in reverence. My children stood beneath the pine tree where my grave rested, the scent of wildflowers drifting through the cool air. Charles spoke first, his voice low but steady. She always said light isn't born from perfection. It's born from persistence. Penelope placed her hand over the wooden marker and whispered, "We'll keep building." And Leo, eyes rimmed with sleeplessness, looked toward the horizon. For every woman, every forgotten soul, we'll keep her promise. The three of them didn't weep openly, not then. Instead, they turned toward the center and began their work. That was how I had raised them. When faced with sorrow, transform it into purpose. Weeks passed. Word spread beyond San Telmo, first to nearby towns, then to the city, and finally across the country. People came in waves: journalists, philanthropists, doctors, artists, even politicians. They wanted to see the mountain sanctuary where lives had been rebuilt, where hope was not just spoken of, but practiced daily. Charles handled the visitors with quiet authority. He walked them through the halls, showing them the dormitories and the learning rooms, the gardens where residents grew herbs and vegetables, and the rehabilitation wing where laughter often drowned out the sounds of pain. This isn't charity, he told them. It's partnership. Everyone who comes here gives something back: knowledge, art, wisdom. No one is useless. No one is forgotten. He had become everything I dreamed he could be, a leader who measured value in compassion, not control. Penelope transformed the old storage building into an art studio. The walls were lined with portraits of the residents, women who had once believed they were invisible, now immortalized in color and light. We paint their stories, she explained to visitors, not to erase their pain, but to honor it. Every wrinkle, every scar, every gray hair is part of their beauty. And Leo expanded the rehabilitation program beyond anything I could have imagined. He created mobile teams that traveled to remote villages, teaching others how to care for their elders with dignity. The first van he sent out bore a hand-painted phrase across its side: "Love is the only medicine that grows stronger when shared." A year after my passing, the government recognized the Hope Center as a national model for elder care reform. The children were invited to the Capitol to receive an award on my behalf. They stood on the grand stage beneath the gilded dome of the National Assembly, wearing simple clothes that contrasted the splendor of the ceremony. When the minister handed them the plaque, she said, "This project has reminded our nation of something we had forgotten, that progress without compassion is not progress at all." The applause was long and heartfelt. But Charles, Penelope, and Leo exchanged a look of quiet humility. They knew that awards were symbols, not goals. The real work was waiting back on the mountain. Over the next 5 years, 10 new centers bloomed across the country, each one carrying the same spirit, the same warmth, the same mission. They were called the Whitlock Houses of Hope. Each one bore a small inscription by the entrance, words I had once spoken to them beneath the rose garden years ago. Respect isn't inherited. It's earned through love in motion. Charles oversaw operations and traveled constantly, ensuring every center preserved the essence of the first. Penelope became the emotional heart of the movement, developing programs that connected young volunteers with older residents. And Leo, now a certified therapist, trained teams of caregivers who worked with empathy rather than obligation. Their legacy began to ripple outward. Other nations took notice. Invitations came from places they had never been: Chile, Japan, France, Kenya, all asking for guidance on how to replicate the model. The idea had become a living map, one that crossed borders and languages. Every year, on the anniversary of my passing, they gathered beneath the old pine tree. The ceremony was never grand. No speeches, no photographers, no crowds. Just them and the wind, and the soft hum of life in the valley below. One such evening, 10 years later, the mountain was quiet, except for the sound of crickets and the distant toll of the chapel bell. Penelope lit 3 candles at my grave. "Do you think she'd be proud?" she asked. Charles smiled faintly. "She'd say we're just getting started." Leo placed a single white rose beside the marker. She'd say, "Now go light another fire." They laughed softly, and the laughter echoed through the trees. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the valley glowed with hundreds of small lights, candles placed outside the homes of the villagers, each one in remembrance, each one a symbol of how one woman's love had reignited an entire world. Years later, when Charles grew old and his hands trembled as he passed the torch to the next generation, he gathered the new directors around him. His hair was silver, his voice gentler now. "Don't build monuments," he told them. "Build mirrors. Let the people who come here see their own worth reflected back at them. Penelope, her hair streaked with gray, sat nearby, painting one last portrait. A woman with kind eyes and a soft, knowing smile. It was me, as she remembered me that first day in the salon, when she learned that beauty wasn't in appearance, but in purpose. Leo, still strong, though slower now, continued to visit the rehabilitation wing every morning, offering his arm to anyone who needed it. Step by step, he'd say, the same way he once guided Mercedes through her first walk to the rose garden. Eventually, when all three of them were gone, their ashes were brought back to San Telmo. The villagers buried them beside me under the pine tree, where wildflowers still bloomed each spring, and over time, a small path was worn into the earth, not from mourning visitors, but from students, travelers, and volunteers who came to pay quiet respect. They came to learn, to heal, to start again. And above them, carved into a stone archway that marked the entrance to the Hope Center, the final words of my journal were inscribed for all who passed through. We built the light. Every dawn that followed, when the sun crested the mountains and bathed the valley in gold, the letters glowed as if alive. And in that light, warm, endless, forgiving, the story continued. Because the legacy of hope is not a name, nor a building, nor even a family. It is the moment when one heart decides that kindness will outlive pain. It is the echo that whispers through time. Love was here, and it remains.